In 1998, two juggernaut war films came out that enjoyed huge critical acclaim and have had lasting impacts in cinema, Saving Private Ryan and The Thin Red Line. They depicted the toll of combat from two completely different theaters of World War II, the 1944 invasion of Normandy and the Guadalcanal campaign in the Pacific. Their portrayal of combat, particularly Saving Private Ryan, were groundbreaking, using filmmaking techniques and set-piece battles that would influence many war films today and create a new standard. Scenes of Omaha Beach, Operation Overlord as a whole, and the Pacific Island campaigns would be commonly represented in cinema from then on. In turn, these victories have since been praised and glorified, with heavy emphasis on patriotism, heroism, fighting for a just cause, and the struggle of the common soldier being central themes. However, there was a film in 1998 that predated both of these. One that didn't depict a United States victory, but an overlooked failure. It threw away patriotic notions and righteousness, focusing on survival, cowardice, innate carelessness, and the collapse of men's morality. It was When Trumpets Fade, a film by John Irvin, whose rendering of the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest showed a starkly different narrative on America's fight against the German Reich. Steeped in negativity and slaughter, it didn't have the same wide release power or scale to match its competition. Unlike its two bigger counterparts, When Trumpets Fade is not graced by a well-known cast or budget. Led by Ron Elder's shell-shocked Private Manning and other actors primarily known for smaller TV work, it focuses on the 28th Keystone Infantry Division and its doomed mission to capture the town of Schmidt, Germany in November 1944. The excessive numbers of casualties during this battle caused Manning to get battlefield promotions he neither wants nor feels qualified for, forced upon him by the grave situation and his natural ability to survive and lead. Between his superiors forcing ill-fated assaults and inexperienced soldiers thrown into the meat grinder, Manning's options and chances of survival seem hopeless. I had first seen the movie in my early teens when I was blown away by Irvin's bleak tone, the shattered resolve of its characters, and the insanity of battle. I knew only of Irvin's Vietnam War film from a decade earlier, Hamburger Hill, which I also remember for its combat scenes. When Trumpets Fade had this appeal that lasted all these years. But does it hold up? Does this movie retain its small but commendable reputation, or does it crumble under closer inspection and age? I can point to better channels that focus entirely on World War II. They are way more in-depth than I'd ever be. But I do have an interest in the subject and have had the background knowledge and means to investigate, so I'll be going over not just the film, but critiquing details and accuracy, as well as the real story of the Keystone Division. I'll also be covering a specific German unit the 28th met in battle on multiple occasions. Having found just how much experience was racked up under their name, I think they're worth more than a mere mention. I will be spoiling this movie, don't think I can get into the second half of this if I didn't. If you want just the history section, skip to this time. The film opens with narration on the Allies' recent victory in Operation Overlord. This here is true, the 28th was selected to march in the parade. Despite the huge cost, it was a massive victory and optimism was high for a German defeat. The Western Allies were going to take the fight directly on German soil. The uplifting opening credits hard cuts soon after to a scene more reminiscent of the Battle of Passchendaele, instead of another celebratory triumph. With an abrupt change of tone, we're thrown into the hellscape of the Hurtgen Forest. Whoever Manning was before this, we'll never know. How we come to know him is not who we'd see as a hero. The sole survivor of his platoon, having only been on the front line for 1 week, has no will to fight anymore. To him, the only sane thing to do is to try to get out of it, either through insubordination or by going as far as claiming Section 8, a type of discharge for soldiers deemed mentally unfit. Manning is clearly suffering from combat fatigue, but with upcoming battles, a woefully understrength company, and lack of experienced soldiers, Manning's superiors have no choice or care to let him go. The situation, to put it bluntly, is chaotic, and it's getting worse. With the unit getting mauled and replacements incoming, Manning is made sergeant and put in control of his own squad. One of the other NCOs is talking to Manning afterwards, and I think he refers to these new soldiers as Marines, which, if I heard that correctly, is irritating and inaccurate. At this point, nothing is sacred to Manning. Looting corpses, killing fellow soldiers to survive another day, and seeing his duty as a waste. His views aren't unfounded, he's just lost hope. His replacement squad shows up naive as expected, with non-existent combat prowess and about to get hit by a dose of reality at the front. Manning has no patience for them, and they don't have a healthy trust of him either. His persona makes it quite clear that he doesn't care for them, which is the last thing you want as a private looking up to your new squad leader. Despite his distance to them, he would rather they stay alive, if only so he doesn't have to put himself in harm's way. Command recognizes veterancy, so the quicker he can turn these new guys into competent soldiers, he can hope to pass off duties and not be so heavily relied upon. The most screen time is given to Zach Orth's Private Warren Sanderson. Seen as the most insecure and physically incapable of soldiering, Sanderson is the one we get to know more intimately than the others. From foxholes to patrols, him and his team are given little time or training to prepare for a confrontation with the enemy. They're learning on the job, which results in success and loss as day by day things get worse and worse. Irvin commits to showing just how lopsided this battle was for the American forces. Attacking into dense woods, at the mercy of tree bursts, confronted with an enemy they thought was on its last legs and instead fought back stubbornly. Constant casualties for little gain, and morale plummeting across the battalion. The film has muted colors and a very cold atmosphere to it that does offer an assumed accurate appearance as to how dismal it must have been. This movie was mostly filmed in Hungary, which of course isn't the same as Western Germany, but it does what it can to approximate the look and feel of fighting in a place as inconceivable as the Hurtgen area. The enlisted men on the ground had to suffer through this the most. But lower level officers and commanders were very aware of how jacked up it was to assault a region like this. We also see how field grade officers at different levels of the chain of command grapple with miscommunication, lack of coordination between units, and objectives versus human cost. No American general wanted to waste their men's lives. But there was more at stake than just this battle. Strategy and even grand strategy were being considered. From piercing the Siegfried Line into the heart of the German Reich to the aftermath of World War II, a lot was riding on battles this late in the war. This isn't to excuse the terrible tactics and operational planning that went into this. We see throughout the film mistake after mistake, which is both an issue with the writing as well as real accounts of the mismanagement from the ground level up. One of these scenes is a push to be made by the 28th into the call area of the Hurtgenwald. It goes from a general attack to a colossal breakdown within minutes. I'm not sure if I should blame Irvin and the screenwriter or base it according to what really happened. I'll save the history for later, so for now I can complain on the film for no reconnaissance being done, nor minesweeping or infiltration to ensure they weren't walking into a trap that was zeroed in by artillery. Also, the close proximity of soldiers was asking for excess casualties. Something which lower army doctrine would explicitly state, or non-commissioned officers would teach, to not bunch up into groups. For making a push into enemy territory, they seem to be very lightly equipped. A push doesn't just mean an attack and calling it good. It constitutes holding ground and self-reliance until relieved. If that wasn't already disastrous of an attack, the next battle is soon underway along the Kaul River. This time, Manning is given a chance to earn his way out when his captain offers him his Section 8 under one condition: to silence the artillery that has been lording over the battlefield. Manning takes it without consulting his squad. Now forced into this special mission, his squad gets their first real test in combat. With the call becoming a killing zone, Manning's squad goes up against an artillery battery with mixed results. Even when attacking from the flank, things get rough as the Germans start to break the nerves of the inexperienced squad. Manning takes extreme measures to keep his squad together and torch the battery. If you ask me, they seem to be doing fine without the flamethrowers, seeing as how they were murking guys pretty easily without them. Maybe it was a timing thing in case of reinforcements. Still, it only allowed for a brief respite as panzers come down the trail in a counterattack, making the entire endeavor a defeat. It's at this point when I like to make two major criticisms, one being the portrayal of the enemy soldiers. For one, they're crap shooters, except artillery. You do get a slight fear of a prepared enemy that's adept at battle, but there's no real character to them. The film has a couple scenes that show an equivalent to Manning's squad, led by an opposing sergeant. They sort of set this counter squad as a threat we can keep note of for future scenes, but they have neither bearing on the plot nor any significant interaction with Manning's team other than these brief scenes. It feels like a wasted opportunity to put a face to an enemy and underdeliver on characterization. Another issue is the music. It's completely out of place to put a movie this bankrupt of fervor and stick it with an outdated score. It's more befitting for an 80s or 90s documentary than it is for a gruesome war film. Here, listen. They really dropped the ball there. After the company returns to the command area, things get switched up. A replacement CO is brought in, played by an under-the-radar Bobby Cannavale, which leaves Manning's deal worthless. He ends up meeting with the battalion commander, who looks past Manning's rebelliousness and disdain, if only because there's no one left to do the job. Manning refutes reports of his capabilities, mentioning rightly how he was just a private 3 days ago and is now in the position of lieutenant. Battlefield promotions and commissions like this were not unheard of. I'd even say quite common back then when there were major combat operations. However, going from a private to a lieutenant in the span of a few days is quite a leap. I've read certain casualty lists of units from the 28th during this operation, and rates for platoons were very high, so I can suspend my disbelief, but just barely. The film doesn't depict any other chain of command higher than battalion level, which is both a good and bad thing. We get to focus on this one company, Soldier really, but we also don't get the whole picture. The film itself has a very straightforward plot that leaves out a lot of key details. The story hinders on Manning, which is fine since Elder's performance is quite good. He reminds me of Steve McQueen from Hell is for Heroes. That film parallels this one with the Siegfried Line attack and a pessimistic soldier leading a squad against overwhelming odds. Instead of dying in another needless assault, he decides to do it his way by leading a night infiltration to destroy the tanks that stunted the previous attack. With this option being the least worst, Manning and his ad hoc team sneak through enemy lines to murk more Germans. In doing so, the company makes their push, not knowing they were saved from certain destruction. At least that's how I interpret the ending, since we never see the outcome. Manning's team is mostly killed off, with an ending reminiscent of the first scene where he was carrying another wounded soldier after an engagement. This time, Sanderson carries him out after he's mortally wounded. Sanderson, through the events of the film, outlived his entire squad and gained valuable combat experience at the cost of his humanity, trudging through the now somehow snow-covered forest alone and into an unknown future. Well, this does not hold up the same way it did for me 15 years ago. For a number of reasons. To start, as much as the acting is passable, there's nothing about it that's outstanding or lively. Which makes sense, since these guys are just soldiers. I'm not supposed to be expecting epic quotes or Superman like in other war films. I do, however, expect to grow attached to characters for who they are, and most here fail at doing that for me. Dialogue sometimes sounds unnatural, like when the medic, played by Frank Whaley, rants at the beginning about the brass being stupid. It just came off as really cheesy to me. Most characters aren't strong or memorable. Even with Manning's squad, I don't remember half of them that well. The Germans are a blur and we don't really get much screen time with them. From what I found out, they were in pretty bad shape too. They lacked equipment, manpower, had virtually no air support, were depleted of reserves, and miserable, among other things. The scene with the flamethrowers also leads me to question tactics throughout this movie. Too numerous to get into. Not only were they not effective on open ground, they had very limited fuel and were most likely not trained on by soldiers that lacked as much training as these new ones. It's my understanding that a large number of infantry replacements were support and specialist soldiers, on both sides. Obviously far worse manpower pool for the Germans. This was late 1944, where training was not as efficient and supplies were sorely lacking after the rapid pace the Allies had when they got to the Siegfried Line. Snow appearing at the end is not as concerning for me since I've read it did happen in early to mid-November in certain areas. How it randomly appears, though, is the real concern. I've mentioned the music not being good, but sound design leaves a lot to be desired too. Everything looks and sounds rather cheap. Weapons, gunfire, tanks, explosions. The gunfire has no punch to it. Slaps and hits are old school sound effects. Things like that detract from the experience when you rely on them. There are inaccuracies in the final text, and this can sort of be debatable. It says 24,000 were killed and wounded in the battle, which is to say the whole of the Hürtgen battle, not just the Second Battle of Schmidt. However, this is a very low estimate. Estimates nowadays put this number closer to 33,000 when you factor in non-combat wounds. This still makes it on the lower side of the estimated casualties. The end text also says that after nearly 3 months, the Allies took the forest. Quite frankly, the Allies were defeated. For one, the battle lasted more than 3 months. 2, the Battle of the Bulge started and ended during the Hurtgen offensive, so they were still reeling from that. 3, the Allies didn't permanently take the forest until around February of 1945. This depends on how you'd frame it as to when the operation began and ended, so who knows. And finally, the biggest screw-up. I don't know how I glossed over this as a teen, because it's so egregious that when I rewatched this, I was stunned. Having served in the army, I have held the real thing before. It's this scene again. Wait for it. Wait for it. There. What the fuck kind of map is that? That's supposed to be is that a field map? If you gave that to a colonel, they'd throw it at your face. I get improvising props, but the army definitely had standard issued maps that were widely dispersed to commanders. They might not have had up-to-date aerial photographs at the company level, but I know damn sure they weren't using that. That's just, dude, the Candyland map is better than that. No important info on it at all. I get that most audiences would be too overwhelmed by the details, but this is pathetic. Okay, I've went on enough about the film, what it did right, and a lot of what it did wrong. I'd still like to say it's an okay movie and more people should know about the failure of the Hurtgen Forest. Not to rag on the United States, but to know its history for what it is. Enhancing the public's perception will do better for it than dismissing it forever. Now, I want to get into talking about the actual history of this battle. The film portrayed one thing, and I took it more or less at face value for years. The big question, did this stuff in the movie really happen? The short answer, yes? No. The long answer, no. Having researched over the course of a week, checking reports and accounts, I was able to piece together a narrative and timeline of what really happened. I'd like to specifically focus on the 28th Division and the 116th Panzer Division, 2 units on opposing sides that were fated to meet each other. I feel it's worth mentioning since the film chose not to highlight any German unit opposing the 28th during this battle. Even though this is for the history nerds, it's still a condensed timeline. See the sources in the description, and if you want to go deeper than I did, have at it. Keep in mind that with any retelling of history there will be conflict in interpreting these events, as well as inconsistencies between sources on specific dates, captions not matching the visuals for sake of convenience, credibility of sources, what exactly did or didn't occur, who did or did not take part, and my own bias. If I mess this up, don't take it too harshly. The story begins with the foundation of the National Guard of Pennsylvania in 1879. It would be called upon sporadically over the decades in smaller engagements and disputes. In 1914, it became the 7th Division, later to be federalized, reorganized, and designated in 1917 as the 28th Infantry Division. Arriving in 1918, the division would play a role in several battles before the war's end. The division earned a reputation for its tenacious fighting capability. Their insignia, the Red Keystone, was adopted before the war's end. Fast forward to Nazi Germany in 1935. While rearming the Wehrmacht, the German Reichsmilitary, the 16th Infantry Division was formed. During the Second World War, it would participate in almost all major campaigns. The division always found itself in combat, eventually splitting into 2 in November 1940. The 2 would work closely together as the 16th Motorized Infantry Division and the 16th Panzer Division. Both were an initial part of Operation Barbarossa, the Axis attack on the Soviet Union in 1941, in service of Army Group South as part of Panzer Group 1. That same year, the 28th would be called back into service in February 1941. It would undergo extensive mustering, organizing, and training while the United States first aided the Allies, then entered the war in December 1941. After the failure of Barbarossa, the Germans unleashed Fall Blau, or Case Blue, in 1942, the attack to capture the Soviet oil fields in Caucasus. Both 16th Divisions would take part in operations in and around Stalingrad. The 16th Infantry Division, notably or allegedly, went further east than any other German unit in the entire war, nearing Astrakhan in late 1942. These advances were cut short when the Soviets counterattacked, encircling the forces in Stalingrad. By February 1943, the 16th Infantry Division was in a fighting retreat while the 16th Panzer Division surrendered with the other survivors of the German 6th Army. The following month, the 16th Infantry Division was redesignated as the 16th Panzer Grenadier Division. Utterly depleted and exhausted after months of combat, the 16th would be moved to France in early 1944. The former 16th Panzer Division that surrendered at Stalingrad was made anew in March 1943, and though they would continue to play a role in the war, that is beyond the scope of this narrative. In October of 1943, the 28th Division would depart America for England to prepare and train for the upcoming invasion of Normandy. Across the channel near the Pas-de-Calais sector, the 16th Panzer Grenadier Division was stationed, where in March of 1944 they would be merged with the 179th Reserve Panzer Division, becoming the new 116th Panzer Division. Its longtime commander was Generalleutnant Gerhard Graf von Schwerin, a presumably anti-Nazi general who had an extensive combat record up to this point. When Operation Overlord began in June of 1944, the 116th was near the Pas-de-Calais, expecting the real invasion to occur there, which it never did. Landing at Omaha Beach on D-Day was an assistant division commander of the 29th Infantry Division, Norman Cota, who also helped advising the plan for Operation Overlord. The 29th would be fighting the Battle of Normandy from the beginning, while the 28th Division would land in France July 22nd. In late July, the 116th Panzer Division would transfer to the Normandy region. This would be the first of several occasions in which the 28th and 116th would face off against each other or be in the same sector, with this time both participating in Operation Cobra. American forces would defeat the 116th, forcing it to regroup and strike again in August for Operation Lutiche, which also resulted in a failure. These victories and subsequent maneuvers would put the 116th, as well as the whole German 7th Army, in an almost closed pocket. This was the third time the 28th and 116th took part in the same battle, with this decisive Battle of the Falaise Pocket almost annihilating the 116th. It would escape with only a few hundred soldiers and a few tanks, retreating to the Siegfried Line or Westwall to the Germans. After this major victory, General Cota of the 29th was given command of the 28th Division. This was right in time for the liberation of Paris, which took place in late August when Allied optimism for a quick end to the war was at an all-time high. Most Germans in France would retreat to the Siegfried Line, as the Allied forces gave chase at a rapid pace. It would only take the 28th Division around 10 days to reach the border with Germany, which, like many Allied units, completely outpaced their supply lines. Attached to General Courtney Hodges' 1st Army, part of General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group, the main obstacle in front of them was the Hürtgen Forest, beyond which were the Ruhr and Rhine rivers. This sector and up north to the coast were defended by Army Group B, under Field Marshal Walter Model, one of the top defensive German generals who had recently been transferred from the Eastern Front. Unlike Normandy, the Germans considered the forest an impregnable natural defense, filled with streams, valleys, gorgeous hills, and dense woodlands situated right in the middle of the Siegfried Line, which was fortified by tank traps, minefields, and pillboxes. Hoping for the best and stacked behind the combined arms of the entire 1st Army, Hodges ordered the 9th Infantry Division to attack straight through. Initial success in September would show promise, but that would soon fizzle out in October. The 28th Division attacked elsewhere, Utfeld, Germany. While making gains, the attack would be called off by Hodges. The cost for less than a week of fighting would be 1,500 casualties. The expectation was that the German army's collapse was imminent, but that had proven so far to be incorrect. Cota, who higher command had hopes for after his performance with the 29th, had failed to capture Utfeld. Something, however, was brewing up north in the Hürtgen sector, so for the time being the 28th was off to recover and replenish. In mid-September, the Allies' major operation was Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands. Yet at the same time to the south in Aachen, Germany, the 116th was ready but under strength. Its commander, von Schwerin, secretly intended on giving up Aachen without a fight, but his plan was found out and he was removed from his position. His permanent replacement would be Generalmajor Siegfried von Waldenberg. The 116th was then moved to Dusseldorf. From late September to early October, it would replenish and refit back up to a total strength of around 11,500 men. For nearly a month, the 9th Infantry was taking the brunt of German attacks in the Hürtgen area, learning firsthand the insurmountable obstacles preventing any breakthrough from occurring. Their clearest goal was the town of Schmidt. which lay past the forest proper and was located at a vital crossing. This would be the first Battle of Schmidt, in which the 9th from October 6th to the 16th would attempt to push through. The Battle of Aachen directly to the north coincided with this, which the 116th Panzer Division would engage in partially. While Aachen would eventually be captured after heavy fighting, Schmidt was completely out of reach for the 9th. Hürtgen Forest was the responsibility of Courtney Hodges, who chose a direct attack and failed. While he could have gone around it, his thinking was that this area could be used to attack his flanks, being a constant threat while trying to get into Germany. So he decided to try again, this time with the rested 28th Division. The 9th was pulled out of the sector, mauled by some of the worst fighting in the entire front, having been relieved by the 28th on October 16th, incurring 4,500 casualties. With one major obstacle of Aachen secured, this plan would be different. It would utilize the strength of an entire corps, but in order to work it would need another diversion, another attack on Schmidt. Seeing as how vital it was to the roar and dams it had, this task was given to the 28th, with full support of the Corps' artillery and bolstered by support battalions of tanks and engineers. The plans were top-down, coming from Corps Commander Leonard Gouraud rather than the 28th Commander Norman Coda. Thus, Coda did not have much say in what he wanted, but what he had to do and how best to execute it. Coda was to split his infantry regiments, the 109th, the 110th, and the 112th, in 3 separate attacks in the sector. The 109th would aim for the town of Hürtgen to the north, the 110th against Simonskal to the south, and the main attack through Vosnack, the Kall Trail, Kommerscheid, and up to Schmidt. The attack was pushed back until November 2nd, when the Corps would attack north of the forest. The constant rain and lack of visibility for planes would mean air support would either be lacking or not assisting at all, something the Germans at this point were always contending with regardless of the weather. Everyone from Hodges on down had varying predictions of success. What they didn't know was that Walter Model, fresh off stopping Operation Market Garden, was in Cologne doing war games with his staff. The strategy specifically involved if Schmidt was under attack and what would happen. The timing was almost perfect. In the vicinity, the Germans had, amongst others, these divisions. The day of the attack went surprisingly well, despite Hodges postponing the Corps attack until November 5th. The way to Hürtgen was immediately blocked by mines, but Vosnack, the Kall Trail, and Kommerscheid were all taken on the same day to barely any resistance. Schmidt itself was captured November 3rd. After the 9th Division's mauling a few weeks prior, this was incredibly unexpected. However, once Model was aware that Schmidt was the primary objective, he immediately issued orders to counterattack. The 116th Panzer Division was to strike the hardest. With devastating artillery bombardment, tank assaults, infiltration, and attacks from all sides, Schmidt was lost within a day. Sightings of mass panics became withdrawals, which quickly turned to routs. The US Corps attack that was supposed to occur on November 5th was postponed again. This meant that in the entire Hürtgen area, at the mercy of an entire German corps and with Model's full attention, was the 28th Division attacking piecemeal. There was little to no air support, constant roadblocks, a horrendous supply chain through the Call, poor weather, and division losing all sense of control. They lost Schmidt, then Vosnack, which was recaptured by an attached engineer company, and were about to lose Kommerscheid. The Simonskal attack was stopped outside the town, as was the Hürtgen attack to the north. The 109th and 110th Regiments failed to meet their objectives, while the 112th Regiment was about to be cut off and encircled. Coda did not know the full situation or conditions his men were fighting in until he left his command post and went to the area on the 6th. All hope of an offense was lost. It became a battle of attrition to hold on to any gains it wasn't about to lose. Eisenhower, Bradley, Hodges, and Gouraud all met with Coda. To say they were displeased was an understatement. They agreed to withdraw all forces beyond the Call back. By November 9th, the Second Battle of Schmidt was effectively over. All there was to do was consolidate, reorganize, shore up defenses, and more. 4th Infantry Division, who was in the area and had to assist the 28th, took over for the 109th Regiment by November 14th. The 8th Infantry Division relieved the 110th Regiment by November 17th, and the 112th Regiment by November 19th. By November 20th, the broken 28th Division had left the Hürtgen sector. At this point, the understrength German forces were also exhausted, having suffered their own fair number of casualties. The primary mission of the 28th Division was to capture Schmidt. The 28th failed, and here's why. We have the power of hindsight now, but this wasn't so clear to the commanders before or during this battle. So many things went wrong that it was destined to fail, if only their leaders above weren't so careless. The 28th operated in this section of the Hurtgen Forest from October 16th to November 19th. It sustained an estimated 6,184 casualties, most of it between November 2nd and November 9th in the doomed attack on Schmidt. With these numbers, this would be one of the highest US Division casualties for a single attack in the entire war. From its plan to its result, it's one of the worst attacks by a US division in the entire war. While the 28th was taken off the line, Courtney Hodges' First Army would continue attacking into the Hurtgen Forest. The 28th would be moved to Luxembourg in late November for rest and refitting. The 116th Panzer Division would do the same in the Ardennes. Both would meet again a few weeks later in the decisive Battle of the Bulge, in which the 28th was unluckily caught in the middle of. Things would be different this time, as the attacks would eventually be beaten back. By the end of the battle, the 28th was depleted but intact, while the 116th was crippled, fleeing across the Ruhr. Once reorganized in late January 1945, the 28th assisted in closing the Colmar Pocket in the Vosges region of France. They then crossed into Germany in February or March, where they would eventually play a part in closing the Ruhr Pocket. This would be the last battle the 116th Panzer Division would partake in, as the majority of the unit surrendered with the rest of the survivors in the pocket. When the war concluded, it was the sign that things would end. In July 1945, the division started redeploying to the US. It returned in August, and when World War II ended in September, that was it. The unit deactivated in December of 1945. From 1935 to 1945, the 116th Panzer Division, including its previous designated formations, were all over Europe fighting, from as far east as Stalingrad to as far west as Normandy, from as early as the invasion of Poland to the Ruhr Pocket. Its life spanned almost the entirety of Nazi Germany's existence. It went from a standard infantry division up to a somewhat well-recognized panzer division while contributing to several big-name battles on two fronts. It was also fated to be against the 28th on multiple occasions, making them a part of the 28th's history forever. The Germans even had a nickname for them, Der blutige Eimer, the Bloody Bucket, based on their insignia. Sources conflicted on the exact date as to when this name stuck. The 28th would be reactivated after World War II and still exists today. It remains one of the oldest division-sized units in the United States Army. Oh man, that went on way longer than I expected. So yeah, totally different than the events of the movie. Turns out it was far worse. The Hurtgen Forest to this day remains a dark subject for the United States military in World War II. When you read into what happened to all those soldiers, you can see why it wanted to be forgotten. Anyway, I learned a ton of stuff, and probably still got a lot wrong. Knowing things like that changed the movie entirely for me, to the point where it'll never be the same. As much as I ruined ever watching that again, I couldn't help but enjoy doing this, and if you want to see more like it, please let me know. Subjects like this are heavy, and amateur historians are extra picky when you get something wrong. So that's the minefield I have to watch out for. As long as people enjoy watching, then I think it's worth doing.